interviewing. You know, that's what they doing. Stick around. It's about to get all Ruby up in here. Remote Ruby starts now.
Oh, welcome myself back to the podcast here.
Yeah, you came back and then we both went away.
Yeah, we've been a little inconsistent here, but we're back.
Yeah, we are. Life's been busy.
I say we just jump right in. We've got special guest Nate Berkopec back. It's been a super duper long time since you were last on.
Nate, I got to say, I'm honestly one of your fanboys. I love talking to you because it's like, I feel like I shouldn't be able to talk to this person, but this person can talk to me because I have Chris with me. And I'm like, I just want to give you some props because you've been one of those people in the community that you're like, oh, I need performance help. I'm like, well, go read Nate's blog. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, so thank you for everything you've done. Is basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's very kind. I appreciate that.
You had posted on X, the drama's died down a little bit, but talking about what's going on with Ruby Gems and Bundler and all of that.
Just go off, buddy. Just let it loose.
Let it rip.
Send it. Just send it, buddy.
We'll just mute ourselves and listen for 45 minutes.
Yeah, there you go, dude. This is your podium.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about where it is now? And then we can go back.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel mixed. When I originally made that post, we were still kind of in it a little bit. And I think the denouement that's happened here is that basically both sides have kind of gone their separate ways here. Like the split has kind of finalized and Ruby Gems and rubygems.org now live with Ruby Core. I gotta go double check what I just said there. Actually, I think maybe rubygems.org is still under the Ruby Central GitHub org, actually, now that I just said that. But that's kind of off on its own now. And then Andre Arco and the former maintainer group that he represents is kind of gone their own way. And they've got a plethora of kind of new projects that have resulted as a part of this whole split. And they've gone their own way. So while I think the dispute is over, I think we're still kind of dealing with the results of that.
You shared a gist, and I really enjoyed reading it because people like you and Searles, it's bias, right? Like, I know y'all, I've listened to y'all for years. It's like, okay, when these people speak, I listen. So I read your gist. It was really good. You want to go back to that point in time?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Talk about like what you personally gave up kind of as a part of this whole transition.
The reason why I followed this so closely is because it really got to me what are a lot of the core cultural issues of open source. What does it mean to own a project? What does it mean to maintain a project? Who should maintain projects? Should we compensate them? Is open source exploitative? And then there was like a whole, culture war DHH angle that got spun off right at the beginning when we all realized it was downstream of this decision to bring DHH back to RailsConf. So it really touched on absolutely everything cultural as it comes to Ruby and open source. And my personal favorite old saw in open source is people getting paid for it. And how do we decide, how do we participate as a community in the work of these projects? And I think what I was frustrated by was this feeling that both sides of this dispute were claiming that Ruby Gems, Bundler, rubygems.org, these projects are very complicated. They're very important. They're very difficult to maintain. And we are the only ones that can do it. You need to give us money so that we will maintain these projects for your benefit on your behalf. It's a model of open source work that I would say the idea is that there is a third party to you of these experienced open source maintainers who maintain the project. This is where I think it gets unclear, for their own benefit, for their own ideas. How are they deciding what should get worked on and what doesn't. It's kind of like up to them. You're giving money to these people so that they will use that, I don't know, like an hourly rate to go work on this open source project. And both sides were kind of trying to claim that mantle. Ruby Central had done this for years, for, I don't know, at least since the Ruby Together merger. So like we've kind of been doing this with Ruby Gems and Bundler for almost 10 years now. And what was funny to me was like when Andre splits out, he and his new co-op kind of continue to claim the same thing. Say, well, we're the maintainers of Bundler and Ruby Gems. And if you give us money, you are supporting the sustainability of those projects. There's a lot of things I don't like about this vision. I think I used to be interested in it, and I was one of the like early supporters of Ruby Together back when Andre started it in 2016. Not like in a big way. I was like one of the, $40 a month or whatever, members they had back then. And I was really interested in this model, but I think it's kind of like panned out in a way that I don't think it really worked. And also like, I think it kind of creates a lot of bad incentives and a lot of things that don't result in good software in the end. And I think what happened is kind of one of those bad incentives in that the ownership of these projects, I'm using ownership in like scare quotes here, now matters. Because if you don't own the project, how can you sell your access to it? How can you try to get money for something that you quote unquote don't own? Both sides, for different reasons, I thought, ended up having to fight over these projects because their lifestyle, I don't know how to put it, like, their continued existence as a funded concern depended on. And I think we all lost because of that. I don't know where to go from there. I mean, like I've always approached my open source work very differently on Bundler. I think I'm kind of somewhat closer to how DHH and Rails works in this respect, but like maybe not completely the same. But Puma works in a very different way. This whole thing really kind of gets at a lot of the big cultural concerns in open source.
I will say in 2020 and 2019, I worked for a company whose sole purpose was to fund open source developers by multiple ideas. But one of the ideas was like, we put ads on READMEs in GitHub, which was a thing for a minute. And then GitHub was like, no, we don't allow that, even though sometimes I still see ads on GitHub READMEs and I get pissed off about that. But that's okay. That's fine. Chris and I know Caleb Porzio, we had lunch with him not long ago. Yeah. So we know people who've made money in open source, and I have a lot of experience in the funding of open source. And it's I feel like a lot of it comes down to, I don't care if Chris uses my open source code in his app, and I don't care if you, Nate, use my code in your open source or in your app. I care if Google and Amazon are using my code in their open source app, and they're taking a disproportionate amount of maybe bandwidth from my server, which it would be in the case of Ruby Gems, or they're taking up a disproportionate amount of my time in the issues or whatever. So I feel like a lot of it comes down to the corporate aspect of this whole argument.
At least in the case of rubygems.org, I feel like the server cost concern doesn't exist because no one ever paid for these servers. So that stuff has always been donated by AWS and Fastly and everything else. So as far as the infrastructure cost goes, nobody ever paid for that. Thank you, AWS and Fastly, very much for all that over the years. I think as far as time, personally on Puma, I just don't care. I mean, I notice when Beirut, for example, John, formerly of Shopify, he was Shopify at the time when we would work on this, would come into our issues and say blah, blah, blah. And it's clearly Shopify related, right? You can tell from the gist of the concern here that it's just something for Shopify. And it's well, I don't really care. It's John. I like John, but I'm not working on this because I think it's Shopify wants it or something. And we have a lot of other people come in the issues that are clearly from big companies and have some particular concern with Puma. Particularly with those companies, I find they're some of the least demanding people I work with in open source because they have the backstop of, we'll just go do it ourselves. We'll write a new project. We'll make a fork and do this thing on our own. So for me, those kinds of people in my issues anyway are the least demanding. So at least in my experience, I've never had that concern. I think a lot of people do. That's not an uncommon thing you just said, but I don't think of it that way. I'm more closer to DHH's open source is a gift. I think I'm a little different in them in that 37 Signals tends to, outside of Rails, tends to release open source projects, which then become abandoned from a maintenance perspective, because 37 Signals has put out this thing and they said, okay, this is it. It works for us. So we're really going to merge stuff and work on this to the extent it directly benefits us. And if it doesn't do that, we're not even going to get involved. And so projects like Turbo, this recently just happened this week. Somebody complained and made an issue about, hey, is this project on maintenance mode? Is this dead on the Hotwired/Turbo repository? And David just replied and said, nope, it just works and it works for us. So close issue. This isn't new. This has literally been the MO for all non-Rails Basecamp open source projects for ever, since 20 years ago. I think I come a little bit further. I'm not quite that far over. I like working on Puma and I like working on stuff kind of for the benefit of other people and not necessarily just directly me. But I don't think I've had a major commit in Puma since my second kid was born. So almost 18 months ago. And that's also fine. We have other people that work on Puma that are not me. And I'm just one of several maintainers. I think I lost my second place Git commit count on Puma in the all-time ranking. I think that happened a while ago, actually. And people just kind of come and go, and that works for us. So relating to like the exploiting angle, or like, it's very difficult for me. It's very difficult for me to relate to that.
Hi, I'm Adam from JudoScale, and like most of you, I'm never going to be as smart, funny, and good-looking as Andrew and Chris. But hey, at least they let me sponsor their podcast. I'll make it quick. JudoScale is an autoscaler for Heroku, Render, Fly, and AWS. We're a better autoscaler because we track more effective metrics, analyze them more frequently, and give you the controls you need to dial in predictable and reliable scaling. Traffic spikes, request timeouts, backed up job queues, JudoScale has you covered. Head to judoscale.com/remote-ruby to learn more.
I have a question, which is, if open source was your full-time job, which it's not, you make money other places. This is not how you make money. If open source was your full-time job, quote unquote, or your only source of income, do you think you'd have a different perspective?
Absolutely, I'd have a different perspective, but I would never be in that position.
Right.
So what was that? I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, like at the middle to tail end of the Ruby Gems fiasco, I actually sat down with Andre Arco in person. He DM'd me on Twitter and was like, I'm in Tokyo. Do you want to come meet up? And I was like, yeah. So I've had coffee with Andre several times over the years. So we were talking about this. And for me, my goal has never been to do open source. Open source is not an end for me. It's a means. And the way that I've structured my business and my life in general is that open source is like this cool hobby that I do sometimes, which has kind of nice side benefits that benefit the actual things I'm trying to do. So when I'm selling my consulting services, it's very helpful to say, yeah, I've maintained Puma for almost 10 years and you're running it right now. So you're already running and trusting code that I wrote. But I've never, ever sold my consulting services as ensure the sustainability of Puma, to help the development of Puma, just to help me out a little bit with Puma development, or anything like that. And just because it's not what I'm trying to do, I'm not trying to sell consulting services so that I can work more on Puma. I sometimes will get in there and do stuff on Puma for the benefit of our clients. And I'm doing something like that right now, but I don't really relate to the end of wanting that. I think this kind of gets into like another saw that I guess I have is like, I do feel that people kind of want a programming job without all of the responsibility.
And I want that. Sign me up.
I think there's this dream that like you can get paid $300K a year to work on an open source project and not be told what to do by anybody. And you just get to build ivory castles.
That's my dream.
I understand the appeal of this. It's like a dream to like never look at a Jira board ever again. And it's like, I'll just work on this cool technical project and people will pay me as my patrons, and I'll just do this cool thing that I think is really cool. And just don't relate to that because it's very self-centered to me. Like I just work on code because of the things that it does for other people. I like the things that this allows us to make in the world. And to some degree, that implies that you must be ready to serve other people. You must be ready to work with other people. You got to be ready to do things for the benefit of others. And capitalism is one way we organize that. But just the community of open source is also another way we do that without the exchange of money. I just don't think that you can have the freedom to do whatever you want and the money at the same time.
But
I don't
why
think anybody
not, Nate?
I don't think anybody owes you that. I don't think anybody owes you that, no matter if they use your project or not.
Government owes me that. No, I'm sorry. I understand what you're saying. I pretty much basically agree with you. Like I've always seen open source as like, this is something I do for number one, to get better at my own skills. Number two, because I like to do it. Number three, because I admire the people who work in open source and I want to be like them. So it's the emulation. And number four, it's like, this is my gift. I view it the same way. It's like, this is a gift. This is volunteer. I don't care if you use my project because at the end of the day, it's like, this is for me. I'm not going to change it just because you want me to.
There was a really good discussion about this on Justin Searles' podcast from about a month ago at this point. It was him and Mike McQuaid, and they were on someone else's podcast too. I don't really remember the name.
The Changelog podcast.
Changelog, thank you. So Mike and Justin talked about this, and Mike, going back however many years on Homebrew, has a ton of experience with this too. But I really kind of vibed with how they explained this whole thing. The takeaway, the title of the podcast was Mike's takeaways. If you don't like it, quit. I don't think that anybody is due paid open source maintainership.
Hot take.
It's so interesting. The big projects like Linux, at the end of the day, it started as a thing. There's like, hey, it'd be fun to build my own operating system. Might as well share it. And now the decision making of like, how do you decide where Linux goes? You have to take into account the corporate sponsors who are
huge corporate interests,
huge. But then you need to balance the individuals that want to run Linux on their own machine. But there's Google and Red Hat and every freaking giant company pushing for their own things. And then balancing all of that is quite the ordeal. It ends up where, you can make a living doing that. But guess what? You're going to make all that money from the companies making profits off of running Linux on, their hosting platform or whatever it is. And that's an interesting thing at the scale of like Ruby Gems, where rubygems.org, where it's like beneficial, but how many companies are willing to step up and sponsor the same way that like you see with the Python Foundation or Linux Foundation and stuff. And it's like, if you don't have a diverse group of companies that are sponsoring, then like it makes it complicated.
I don't think that the Ruby community is like unique in the respect of not having companies step up here. Like, I don't think that our like community participation here is any worse than Linux as a whole. Maybe as like a per capita per company, it's even better. But it's just, we're not that big. We're not Linux, right? So like Linux is maybe one of the most important software projects in the world. So they can make the Linux Foundation and pay Linus Torvalds $1 million a year because the 0.01% of the bottom line of every company that depends on Linux is still $1 billion. So there's a big enough pie there that the 0.01% that can be easily allocated to these very indirectly helping open source projects, like that can still be a ton of money. The pie is not that big in Ruby. So the money that comes out of that kind of model is just not going to be as great for us.
When your app breaks in production, you want to quickly understand and fix it, not sift through the logs for the next hour. That's where Honeybadger comes in. Honeybadger notifies you of errors, outages, and performance issues as they occur and helps you respond instantly when your systems go down. When you need to dig deeper, Honeybadger's advanced query engine helps you reach into your logs and grab just the information you need. With error tracking, performance and uptime monitoring, log management, and support for over 10 languages, Honeybadger is the best tool to gain real-time insights into your application's health and performance. Best of all, it's free to get started and setup takes less than 5 minutes. Be sure to bookmark honeybadger.io. That's www.honeybadger.io. This is interesting. So like the Linux Foundation has 12 platinum sponsors, which are like Intel, Meta, Microsoft, Oracle, Qualcomm, Samsung, Red Hat. And that membership is 500,000. So they make 6 million. That's really it from their top 12. And then gold is 100,000. They have 14 of those. So it's another million. And then they have silver sponsors that can vary, but that's like 5 to 20,000. They have 14,000 of those. So they have still like the big sponsors are still very small number of companies, but then they have tons of small donations there with 14,000 if there's whatever average of 10 or 15,000 each. That adds up a ton there. But that's because Linux is like literally everywhere, you know, in production and stuff. So it's definitely a massive pie. And it's like Ruby is just tiny in comparison. I was thinking earlier when you were talking about like, I've been maintaining the PageM where initially I was like, oh, it'd be easy enough to add support for other payment processors. But like, if I don't use them, I've taken the open source burden of maintaining this thing that I don't use, that I'm not going to know how to do properly when they change things. I'm not going to notice. There's so many like pain points and issues with accepting that work as a maintainer that like I had to stop doing that, and we'll probably drop a handful of the ones that we currently have because I don't use them still. And it's like, there's no sense in me maintaining that going forward. And that's one of those interesting balances of like, that is why 37 Signals will open source something and they're not going to accept a whole bunch of PRs for features they don't use. But in order for like Rails to do that, you've got the core team that's a bunch of people from many different companies. So that kind of opens up the like ability to maintain features that one company doesn't necessarily need, which I think is helpful because you look at like Hotwire and it's like the only people with commit access work at 37 Signals. So there's no incentive for them to merge anything that the community has trouble with that they don't. And that I think is a problem. Maybe that gets fixed eventually, but it's like, we're going to need a team of people from different companies, different needs, different backgrounds. And that's like what you were saying with Puma is like, you have that and some things you can merge then because it's like, well, I don't need this, but actually this contributor here totally does. And it makes sense. And we're happy to maintain that. But
let me drop an actual hot take on this podcast. We need to fork Turbo. We need to fork Hotwire. So I have been saying this for a while, back when Turbo 3 got nuked and became Turbo 5. This became very clear to me. Turbo 3 actually had a degree of community involvement, which the current projects don't have. There was somebody who I can't remember the name of at the time who had commit bit that was not on 37 Signals or not. I don't remember what they were called at the time, whatever. That was merging in kind of community stuff. And it very much felt to me like Basecamp felt, this got a little out of hand. We're going to nuke this and start over again. And we're going to call it Turbo 5. It was like a hard break. And there was they might have even made definitely a new repository, I think. And there have been people in the community that have wanted to push Rails, the Hotwire Turbo approach forward. They wanted to be the Hotwire person and be the Turbo person. They want to add stuff to it. They want to like serve more people's needs than what Basecamp just gets out of it, right? And you can't do that if you don't have the final say in what goes into the project. Basecamp has made it very clear about how they feel about this, and we talked about that already. So I would prefer a community fork of those projects. I think there's definitely a pool of people who have been turned away by that would be served by a community fork of those approaches. It's also not that complicated. We're not talking about rebuilding a new kernel or something. Like this is not like a massive undertaking. But if you have opinions and interests, if you have opinions about where an open source project should go, and if you have an interest in the success or change in that project, I guess like my message is you should pick up a shovel and like go do it, not pay other people or expect other people to do it on your behalf. And I think that's another thing I dislike about like these, Ruby Central or anybody saying, pay me. Oh, it's like, this project is really complicated. You couldn't possibly understand. Like, oh, there's so much work here to do. And it's explicitly discouraging people to commit to this project, to get in there and do things themselves. At Puma, like my mindset is like completely the opposite. Like I want as many people to get involved and try to commit to Puma as possible. So there's a link in the Puma contributing.md that lets you book a call with me. So if you want to contribute to Puma and you're feeling stuck and you're like, oh, I don't know where to start. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to build the native extension locally and it doesn't work. You can just come find me and we'll work through it. A lot of my work as a maintainer has not really been to actually do commits and like push new big features in Puma, but instead to just like grow our maintainer base and to just try to get more people committing to Puma. And it's worked. So like when Evan handed over that project to Richard and I in 2016, since then we've added MSP Greg. He's been maintaining Puma for, 5 years now. We recently added Dentarg, Patrick, to the maintainer team. He's been like really active in issues and documentation. And just this week, we added Joshua Young, who currently works at BuildKite, to the Puma maintainer team. All of those people, when they were getting started, were people that kind of took my time as a maintainer. I invested time in working with those people to like get them feeling like they could contribute, work through some initial issues. Ultimately, they felt like, hey, this is a project where my contributions are welcome and I can work on this and do stuff here. And now we have, I guess I just said 5 active maintainers, which for a project of Puma's size is huge. We have like 5,000 lines in the lib directory. So we've got 5 active maintainers, and RubyGems and Bundler, RubyGems/Bundler now has 1. That's a demonstration of how those models have ended up of open source participation. I guess I'm asking both sides to change their mindset here. Like people who are maintaining popular open source projects, you are a blocker. You are standing in the way, and you need to get out of the way, because there are people who want to work and to contribute for free to this project, but you have to give a little bit up, and you have to give up a little bit of control, a little bit of ego, and say, this project is not just mine. This is for all of us to work on together. This is just my model of like, obviously I don't think Basecamp has to do this. But if you want to make more software, this is the model I'm proposing. On the contributor side, I'm asking, don't be intimidated and get in there and do the thing. Because I didn't know jack about HTTP1 or sockets or processes or threads before I started contributing to Puma. And I learned it along the way. It's just software. You'll figure it out. It's not that complicated.
I upgraded an app to Rails 8.1 this week and like found a couple gems that their gem spec hasn't been changed yet. There might be a couple deprecation things that need to be addressed. But like you're saying, we need more maintainers. When you create a project and you open source it and want it to be used by the community, it's like your duty to make sure it's not just you. So when you get tired or busy or have a kid or hit by a bus, that project that everybody relies on, it doesn't just become abandoned and dead. And then everybody has to like figure out what's going on. There's no process for us to have like a clean replacement and a new gem published and whatever new maintainers if they don't add somebody. So like the community relies on these projects to have many maintainers so that even if it's just small things of like, yep, I'm going to make sure that these gems always get updated so that they're compatible with Rails 8.1, Rails 8.2, Rails 9, whatever. that could be somebody's expertise, and they just go around making sure that devise works and yada, yada. But right now, there's so many things that are semi-abandoned that make the Rails community look like it's also somewhat abandoned, because you have these popular gems. Access Taggable was one of the ones that I ran into. It's like there's PRs to have it updated and be compatible, but nobody's there maintaining it to merge those, to review them, to like just give the little bit of oversight that's like, hey, we should address this deprecation warning now before we merge that or something. Like a maintainer doesn't actually have to write the code or whatever, but they can just be there to guide people on like, here's some of the knowledge I have maintaining this for the last 5 or 10 years. Improve this PR a little bit like this, and it'll be way, way more stable and whatnot in the future. And like that can be the role of maintainers. You don't have to be writing code or whatever. And it's like something that just feels incredibly missing from the community every time you see, oh, there's a new release and now half my gems are broken or whatever, and I got to go fork them temporarily or use somebody else's fork. And then their fork only gets that one change, but none of the other things that are bug fixes or new features or whatever. And it just becomes a giant mess. And that feels like a related problem to all this. Yeah, open source can be tough because right now it's like you're the owner and that's it. And you can share it with the community, but the community doesn't own it. So then it's like, what happens to it when something goes wrong?
Well, there's two things there. I think one is we've made open source maintainer a synonym for like hero. They're expected to be these like hero coders. They're pushing 20 commits a day, and the image is just like this person in a basement that writes 1,000 lines of code a day and is like this self-sustained little castle. And then if you think that, it's very easy to start to leap to, oh, well, we need to pay this person. My maintainership of Puma has very much not been pushing code. It's very much what you just said about reviewing a pull request and saying, well, it doesn't really fit in the direction of this project. It would if you moved it in this direction. My work as a maintainer is almost exclusively what I would call like project direction and trying to find and grow new contributors. That's really it that I do. And what's cool is that when you have 5 people working on a project, that can be one person's job. And we have Richard from Heroku, and he kind of works on stuff and kind of comes and goes when Heroku has a particular need. So Richard has done a ton of work on the Puma 7 release, purely because Heroku shipped something that changed their needs in terms of the router, and like it blew up Heroku. And so like his company suddenly had a lot of needs and they jumped in to work on that. And now we all have a better Puma as a result. We've got Greg, who pretty much works mostly on the CI suite. So like the whole CI suite is Greg's domain. We've got Patrick, who kind of is like our issues and repros and docs guy. And then Joshua's kind of like coming in and doing some stuff around like the refork feature and other stuff like that. And so like he's got particular features he cares about. So I kind of want people to just like go into an open source project and work on the thing about it that you need, like the thing that interests you. For example, the kind of person I've been trying to look for in Puma for years is somebody to own the native extensions. We have Java and C extensions. The C extension is 20 years old, I think, at this point. And no one really owns that to the extent it really needs to be owned. And I've been looking for that like unicorn of like Ruby plus C or Ruby plus Java person to like really kind of be that maintainer for us. But that's possible on our project. All those things I just said don't have to be contained in one person, because we have this model where it's a duocracy. If you show up, we'll give you the commit bit and you can come on in and we'll let you do your thing. To the extent that maintainership does have to be very kind of limited to a certain amount of people, I think it really comes to security. So this is something that actually kind of came up in the Ruby Gems fiasco. And there are still only really 3 people who have, well, I think at least of the gem authors on Ruby Gems, there's 3 people that have gem push access to Puma. There is still a security aspect where, you can't just have everybody that shows up, and makes a commit. You can't just hand them gem push access to rubygems.org. So like that's like an unfair burden that gets placed on me and Richard is like the security and the if somebody reports a CVE, right, that's a security issue to Puma, like we don't just give that to everybody. But that's a pretty limited thing. And at least in our project, it's not like a ton of work. So for the most part, we try to just bring in anybody who shows up. That sounds very lukewarm, but it's actually so rare. Like I really don't see any other projects in Ruby that are as not just welcoming, but like actively seeking contributors to the extent that Puma is. And I wish we had more of that.
It's sort of, at least in the Rails world, sort of the example being set is these are gifts and these are the things that we open source, and the amount of people that are added to the Rails core team doesn't change hardly ever. It's still a very small team for the size of the project. You know, like we talked about earlier, Hotwire doesn't have a core team or anything. It's just people from 37 Signals. It's not the best example to set, and probably just kind of, it can be tough. It was like, as a single person working on the PageM myself, we get often like contribution suggestions of like, could we support this payment processor or whatever? And it's like, well, yes, but do I know if you're going to stick around, or are you going to dump this on me and then it's my problem now and you've disappeared after we, merged it in or whatever. And there's a bit of that, or it's like, yeah, you as the maintainer need to build some trust and relationship with these people who are wanting to contribute. But like that can still be done where they could make that a plugin, and then over time, like they keep contributing, and then you're like, okay, you've earned your trust. You belong here. You absolutely deserve to be a maintainer on this and whatever. Like that, I think happens all the time on these projects, but there's something that maybe doesn't catch people's attention, or just like GitHub or something is not as in tune of like adding maintainers as a process that should be built into the UI or something to encourage people to do that. Or even with Ruby gems, like security is important. The people who can release a gem probably need to be very, very trusted. But yet you do that strictness too much, then it discourages anybody from adding anybody else.
Well, I think GitHub and Ruby gems both have another problem. We really like kind of encourage almost like namespace squatting on particular project names. And if you are the first person to have a project called Puma, and now github.com Puma/Puma is our repository, and rubygems.org, the gem Puma is us, it's very difficult to fork and like have any discoverability on a fork there.
Yeah.
So like Puma's a little bit of a unique case because we're BSD 3 clause, and like if you fork us, you actually can't call it Puma. But we've handed so much community gravitas to a particular repository URL and a particular project name on rubygems.org to the fact that like I just don't know how a fork is ever supposed to get off the ground and relate to the previous project. Some solutions that have been proposed here, at least on the rubygems.org side, is namespacing. And I've been very in favor of namespacing since the beginning for this reason. I think somebody should be able to make, you should be exit 3 / Puma. You should be able to publish that. And we should know, like, okay, this is Chris's fork of Puma.
And like NPM does that.
With organizations.
Yeah, and that like,
so like,
I've used
I feel like that was kind of a contributing factor in some of what happened with rubygems.org is like the fork off ramp was not really credible for either side because there was too much to start over on. There was no great way to like relate this fork back to the previous project in terms of the GitHub URL or anything like that. So like, I wish we had more technical paths to make forking more discoverable and easier. Because right now, basically on github.com, the fork button has become the thing that you do before you make a patch, right? Like it's not really a fork. It's just like the temporary thing that exists so that you can make a pull request. It's not the thing that's like, I'm forking Turbo and this is going to be a project that is maintained forever and it represents a new direction that button doesn't exist on GitHub. I think we'd have more people contributing to open source if they felt like that was a more viable option.
Yeah, and I think that would help with like the older gems that aren't maintained anymore. Like it gives somebody the ability to make their version of it that is maybe deviates logically from the old version, because guess what? Some of those ideas don't fit anymore. Like that's fine. You know, Paranoia is a good gem where it's like you ended up having to build a whole new gem with a different name, with a different solution, but Paranoia had no way to evolve. And it's like, yes, monkey patching active records destroy was not a good idea. So we have discard, and that takes a different approach. And you mark it as discarded instead of trying to override active record. Good idea. But like Paranoia could have evolved into that, but it just had to be like, all right, from scratch, new marketing, new everything, as opposed to having this led to that. And maybe that makes sense for you. Maybe it doesn't, but here's like the original idea plus all of the fruit from that as well. Doesn't exist at all right now. I'm sure that several people have talked about like, and I know I've asked somebody about why doesn't rubygems.org support organizations? And I know the answer was like, I don't think we're going to do that, which is like, okay, well, it'd be nice if somebody forked it and did offer that. And then the community.
Well, Chris, let me tell you about a little project called gems.coop.
Right. SingularGem.coop.
Yeah, sorry. Right.
Walked right into that.
Walked right into it. Yeah.
That's one of the things is like the open source idea was if you want to change things in some way, like, great, go do it. But then it feels like you were talking earlier about financially saying, well, we're the ones with the expertise. You have to pay us to do this because it's too hard. That also discourages the new ideas of like, well, we're clearly smarter than you about this. And doesn't give people, if they decide they don't want to add something like that, there's no experimentation to see what happens if we do add that. And that's a problem to just bringing new ideas to the community, period. Like if everything's discouraged that you don't want to do, then like we're not going to evolve and improve as a community. That was like one of the things that I loved about coming to Ruby from Python. It was like the Python community hated Python 3. No one wanted to adopt it. It was wild. And then I come to Ruby and it's like, yeah, we're all running like the bleeding edge version of like, we're running Rails main in production, like latest version of Ruby. And we want to use the new features as soon as they're available. And coming from Python and Debian communities and stuff, it was the opposite. And I was like, this is really, really refreshing. But yet there's still parts of that here, it seems, that's like, you know, it's easy to get into that mindset too, or like you need things to be stable. Yes, that's a good thing.
I've seen some reactions to what's happened here is like splitting the community or trying to shut down this idea of forking these projects or starting new stuff. And it's just like in the last month, we have seen more code and new projects started and committed on in the Ruby gem packaging space than we've seen maybe in like 5 years. So the 8 people who were unfortunately bulldozed under the bulldozer of Ruby Central here have started, I think, like 5 different projects in all different kinds of parts of the packaging ecosystem here. And it's just an amount of ideas and code being pushed, which hasn't happened really in a long time. So like, I don't believe in like, oh, we got to keep it together and not split the community. Like I believe in open source as a free association principle of like, we're here to work with the people we want to work with. No one should feel like they're forced under a particular tent. We get better software from people working with people they like to work with on ideas they like to work on. And that's going to involve some forking. And these projects, by the way, they're all MIT licensed. So if someone comes up with a cool idea, you just take it. You don't have to work with them even. You don't have to get into their issues and say, oh, do this, do that. Just do your thing. And if you see something you like, take it. No one can sue you. It's all MIT licensed. We're all here to just put stuff into the commons. And this has happened. So like Matthew Draper didn't want to get involved in Ruby Gems and bundler governance. He writes his own bundler replacement called Gel, implements the pub-grub algorithm. I'm getting the history mixed up here. I don't know if John Hawthorne did it or if Matthew did it, but like basically there was this fork of bundler, put in this new algorithm. It's really fast. And then bundler's like, cool, thanks. We'll take that. And they put it in a bundler, and now bundler's faster and better for all of us. So like that might happen again. Doesn't mean that these projects are going to be the bundler replacement, but they might come up with something cool that gets put back into rubygems.org or bundler. And I hope it does. So I hope that we encourage these people and don't try to shut them down.
There's the whole history of Merb made Rails a lot better too. And it got merged in different things, it gives you space to try new stuff because you don't have the same mindset. You're not stuck or whatever. So,
yep.
Well, you got to run.
I'm
sure we could have kept going for another hour. But
you want to tell people where they can find you online?
Yeah, follow my capital P posts on X, Blue Sky, Mastodon. I'm Nate Berkopec on all those platforms, and consulting for Rails performance issues on speedshop.co.
Very cool. Well, we appreciate you coming on and everything you've done for the community. So thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks, guys.